Hi, my name is Jira, and I'm the founder of Planetary Health Lab at the University of Edinburgh. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Sally J. Goner and Suwen Chen. Dr. Sally J. Goner is the director of the Energy Systems Science Research Cohort at Planetary Health Lab, and Suwen Chen is a third-year PhD candidate in impact investing at the University of Edinburgh. Suwen Chen first started her academic career in 2010, where she decided to pursue a master's degree at Imperial College of London in translational technology. She then later on built a successful career in advertising, however felt that consumerism in the advertising world was in conflict with her own personal values. In order to gain a better understanding of how the business world worked, Suwen decided to move to Edinburgh in order to pursue an MBA and then further her studies with a PhD in social entrepreneurship. She believes that businesses play a pivotal role in helping the most vulnerable in society, as well as playing a pivotal role in preserving the natural environment. And in order to achieve this social good, profit does not have to be sacrificed. She believes that businesses and the social goods that they can deliver are one and the same goals, and profit maximization can and work harmoniously with this. Suwen Chen's passion for social entrepreneurship and innovation has meant that she has now developed her own impact investing course for Moving Co., where she wishes to build the next generation of social entrepreneurs working in transformative change. Thank you, Suwen, for joining us today. And I'd just like to shed light to two of Suwen's recent publications in the Financial Times, one about the importance of women's roles in impact investing, and the second, an interesting article about humanity, not AI, being the ultimate algorithm for addressing complex challenges. Thank you, Suwen, and thank you, Dr. Sally J. Goner.
Okay, so Jawaria, you just asked, how does my kind of energy network analysis fit with planetary health? And the explanation goes something like this. All right, the root problem of all of our problems, not economic, environmental, social, all of it, is in fact this oligarchic capitalism. All right. And the solution, if you're going to have long-term sustainability, you have to attack that root problem as well. And you have to have an understanding of what you have to do in order to build something that doesn't have the same problems, doesn't just steer us back into the same kind of recurrent crises that we do, whether it's economic or financial or pandemics or environmental, or it's all part of the same kind of maximizing the profit for a few people, regardless of the impact on other people and the planet as a whole. All right. So what the energy network stuff does is it basically gives you a very logical and common sense, as well as a rigorous and heartwarming, it's my favorite part is it is actually heartwarming, approach to understanding what we need to do as a civilization, as a global civilization, and at every level, to build back in a way that doesn't repeat the oligarchic problems that we're currently facing. And the charm of it all is that it basically says we're a collaborative learning species, and that in order to be an effective collaborative learning species, we have to have a common cause culture, which a lot of people have written about and studied in terms of, one of my favorites is Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize, but there's Wangari Maathai. There's all sorts of people who are working at what really goes into creating a common cause culture. And it's not just love is all you need. A lot of it has to do with reciprocity and accountability and information flow and accuracy and this balance between flexibility and constraint, which is essential. I mean, and all of these things are mirrored in the way energy systems work. So when it comes to how does it apply to planetary health per se, it says first we need to look at the underlying root cause, which is how do we go about building healthy human networks, and what does that mean, and how do we measure it? What are the key elements that go into it? And that to the extent that in terms of the environmental side of things, it's not that we're going to find one final solution to how we make the planet healthier. It's going to be an ongoing learning process. And each time we come up with a new solution, we'll try it for a while and there'll probably be some kind of shortfalls and then we'll have to rethink. And so it's a very much of an iterative process that you go through. But what you have is this overlying understanding of that nature as a whole ends up producing these particular patterns that you have to mirror if you're going to have long-term sustainability. The obvious one of that is this fractal distribution of small, medium, and large, because that maximizes circulation from top to bottom. So in economic terms, you need to have this ability for the little guys to be able to spend money so that they can purchase the products, so that the suppliers can make them and hire more people. And so that's how you get this nice circulation going. And I mean, this is classic economics. This is not something new. It's just that we have a more comprehensive and logical and measurable way of explaining why you need to have this particular balance of small, medium, and large. And particularly why excessive concentration is, in fact, it undermines the health of the whole society and the whole economy, including the people who are incredibly rich. On the other hand, it also says that it's not that we want to get rid of all rich people and that everybody's going to be exactly the same. No. You need people who actually, or you need a level of the system that has high concentration and is highly efficient, so that they can do the large scale, cross scale things efficiently, which is why efficiency is important. But if you have too much of that, what it'll do is it'll suck all the wealth up from the bottom and create economic necrosis, which is what we're partially facing today. So that Amazon is making money hand over fist, but it's also driving out of business all the local people who may have, who need to have, they represent the diversity and the resilience that the system needs, so that if there's some kind of problem, or if Amazon gets too concentrated, you have a way to spring back or find alternatives, which are so hopefully developing through this diverse, intricate, lower level systems that we really need to have in balance with the bigger ones. But now there's a mathematical ratio called power laws that say exactly what the ratio of the small, medium, and large needs to be. So you now have an exact way of measuring all of that.
So from one perspective, we're thinking of how to measure the complexity of human systems so that we find this balance between the natural world and our own role, right? Another question that we need to find is how to make businesses behave more sustainably, right? So you're talking about CEOs helping the circulation and flow of money in the economy so that we're helping everyone, right?
It's very much a cultural change issue in that kind of sense, yes. And
right,
leadership
so
turns out to be central, right?
Yeah, so let's bring in Suwen in this point. Suwen,
okay.
How can businesses act more sustainably?
I think one of the things we can do is to mobilize the money we have, mobilize the money we have in the financial market or the asset under management, because it's estimated that, for example, $3 trillion a year is needed to tackle the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, such as climate change, poverty, hunger. People may think that, wow, $3 trillion per year is a lot, but it's actually not. The total asset under management globally is over $100 trillion. So even if only 3% of that money goes into impact investing or social investment, whichever we are describing, because we have so many terms now, like ESG as well, we can solve these grand challenges we are facing. And I think Sally is probably an economist. So when we are talking about the father of economics, we think about Adam Smith. And also we are both based in Scotland. So people are probably more familiar with his masterpiece, the Wealth of Nations, where he talked about markets and also the other things, the invisible hand. While Adam Smith took more pride in another book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. So I think in the Theory of Moral Sentiments, it's about the visible heart, where he actually talked about the compassion, the altruism, and social impact. When I was reading his book, I was surprised to see that he actually said human beings are not only want to be lovely, but also want to be loved. And I was surprised to see here talking about this altruism thing. So I actually think Adam Smith is the advocate for impact investing or social investment, or the business with business can do good and do well at the same time. So,
right. But of course, then, I mean, I love that you brought up the theory of moral sentiments. I think that, I mean, it's so important, and so few people realize that. I mean, what they've done is the oligarchic part of the civilization has taken this part where self-interest, which is a very small part of that whole thing, and blown it completely out of proportion.
Exactly. It's fragmented. So the heart of economics or the business is why. So why we are having a business? We're having a business to do good, and the byproduct is to do money. I think there is a chocolate bakery in New York. They were saying we are not hiring people to make chocolates, but we are making chocolates to hire people. So if we think about the ends and means, and sometimes we overemphasize the profit, the importance of profit, but that's only a vehicle, not the end. So
Right.
the end purpose of every business, I think, is to do good and to create the society full of well-being and happy people.
And but unfortunately, what you need to do nowadays is have an economic theory that justifies that, because we don't have that. I mean, right now, we still have maximizing profit for owners alone. And as a result, and what you do is you end up maximizing the profit for owners and minimizing the well-being of everybody and everything else. So, and again, Amazon is a good example of this. I mean, they're making money hand over fist, but they're also minimizing the amount that they distribute to their workers. So their workers are trying to unionize in order to get a $15 an hour wage. And Amazon is doing all sorts of dirty tricks in order to avoid that.
Yes,
So,
yes.
in classical economic theory, the reason you give tax breaks to the rich is so that they will invest it back in their companies, and the reason the companies will be able to sell stuff is because they're paying their employees enough to buy things that they are producing. I mean, that's the classic Henry Ford idea. But that's not what's happening nowadays. And so part of the problem is this leadership business it's how do you get people who've been trained and it's not only that they've been trained, but the incentive system and your well-being, your ability to make money and progress in your job are all dependent upon fitting into this existing maximize the wealth of a few people kind of idea.
Yeah, I agree about especially the idea about incentives. I think let's continue with the Amazon example. They treat their employees badly, for example. And nowadays, I think millennials, they are paying, when they are looking for jobs, their surveys and statistics show they are not looking for money. They want to join more socially responsible business. They want to do good, and also they want to have a better working environment. So Amazon, by treating their employees badly, is paying a reputation task if there is anything like that. So the future generations may not want to work for them, so they may need to pay a premium to attract more talents. While the other more socially responsible business, they may find it easier to get talents and sustain their business.
On the end, I agree completely. And this sort of brings up the whole issue of education. And not only how much education is available to you, but what kind. So I did some work with some educational reform people. And from their point of view, the educational in the US, they call it public education. It's the general education for the public at large, as opposed to what it is in Scotland and in the UK. But so everyday schools are built on the Prussian plan, which was developed in 1819 and was designed to create people who were obedient workers, who always knew their place in the pecking order because there was always somebody who was ranked higher than they were, who knew how to read and write and follow instructions, but were largely insecure so that they didn't want to go out and start their own business or, compete or those kinds of things. And that's as opposed to what they know how the way human brain works, which is that you need to have meaning making, you need to have cooperative or synergetic kinds of learning, so that different types of people join their complementary skills, so that you have a kind of a synergetic and you need to have sufficient diversity of talents and skills, really, in order to get the whole thing to work. And so, they've known how to make they know how to make education and learning fun and exciting and relevant and meaningful and problem solving and experiential and all the kinds of things that you need. And when you do that, you create lifelong learners. And it doesn't matter what they go into, whether they're going into construction or science or finance or whatever it is, they have this general sense of I need to link up with others in order to have meaningful work that's making a positive contribution to my society. And when I do that, I will make enough money, but mostly I will feel good about what I do with my life. And that's the goal of the kind of education we need, but that's not what we currently have. And I've seen places where they've implemented this kind of learning, and it's just mind-boggling. It's transformative, and it spreads. I mean, so I went to one in Arizona, which was in a relatively poor neighborhood. And what happens is that, the kids go to school and they're coming back and they're very excited and they're doing these rules of collaborative learning. And then they talk to their parents and they intervene in kind of like domestic abuse problems. And the parents get excited because, oh my goodness, my kid is now asking me to not beat up on his mother. And then they come and they join the school and they participate in helping out landscaping, and they participate in teaching kids or taking them on field trips or showing them what they do to earn their own living. So it's really astounding what difference it makes. But in order to have the kind of people who can push back on the oligarchy, you need to have that kind of education and have it available to everybody.
Yeah, I agree. It's to cultivate people to take a holistic view when they are small, not just to pursue something single-minded, but to think about other things and have a balanced life as well. Yeah.
So do you actually work with people who pardon me, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name.
Impact investing?
Impact investing, yes, thank you.
I apart from my PhD study, I'm also working for some business angel investors in Scotland. So I really, it's interesting to see how I've been working for them since end of 2018, so over 2 years now. It's good to see how the angel investment community is changing. And they are really looking into more social investment and more investment with impact and green investment. So I'm really happy to see that the paradigm is shifting from risk and return to risk and return and impact. Yeah.
So do you see, I mean, you mentioned social investments as well as the environmental ones. And is there much money going into the social parts? And if so, what kinds of things are attracting money?
That's a good question. So because the angel investors I'm working with are more into the energy sector, so that's more like the green, more environmental invest. But still, I'm not sure if you know First Port, which is an incubator in Edinburgh, and they would incubate some social enterprises in Scotland. Because Scotland, although it's a small country, there are over 6,000 social enterprises, surprisingly, with 5 million people. So that's really a huge amount of social enterprises. Yeah, so in terms of the money goes into like bakery and also some like the online good food club, like the online delivery, or Brewdog, Brewgooder. You probably know the beer, the brew thing. Yeah, so there are a variety of social enterprises. Yeah. And also there are some social media agencies recruit disabled people to do website design. So it's to achieve multiple social benefits.
So what makes something a social enterprise as opposed to a classical enterprise?
So, well, the definition of social enterprise depending where you are. So in Scotland context, social enterprise is a hybrid between a charity and a commercial, traditional for-profit business. And to be able to be a social enterprise in Scotland, you have to have this asset lock. So the asset of, for example, the profit made from the social enterprise has to be locked into the social enterprise. So you cannot sell it.
There you
Or
go.
exit to a commercial business and make it a trick, because if there is people may want to look for some tricks, but you cannot do that. So the asset is locked. And even if you want to sell that business, you have to sell it to another social enterprise or business with a similar kind. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Actually, they have a nonprofit definition here, but it's sort of been corrupted so that, originally all of the profits had to stay in the business in order to make it a nonprofit. And it had to have some kind of social mission that it was pursuing, or some kind of positive, contributive kinds of mission. But, they've gotten around it by saying that, okay, but if you're a CEO of one of these places, you can still make 500 times as much as your lowest paid employee.
Yeah, exactly. That's it sounds like very self-conflictory.
Yeah. They just found out a way to get around the good intention. So I like this idea of the way you're approaching social enterprise. And okay, so in my world, there is a scale issue. So the bigger you get, the harder it is to maintain that kind of social consciousness and social mission in life. Is there, does having the profits locked up in a lockbox help that?
That's the thing. That's what I discovered in my research. There is a danger of mission drift if you want to scale. And also sometimes I find that, especially social enterprise in Scotland, some people don't want to scale. They want to maintain this small and nice and beautiful thing because they are serving the community. And if you go too big or become a franchise or chain, you can't lose the heart-ish. So there are some people they don't. There are some investors even approach to them saying they want to invest, but they don't want to take more money. They want to. It's more like lifestyle business for a lot of social enterprises.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And in many ways, I think that's a wonderful and great thing for it to be. I mean, stay small and wholesome is kind of like the idea. On the other hand, particularly like in farming and food networks, we find that in order to maintain the quality and the local ownership, you really need to have some kind of common cause network that you build out of it. So a couple of people in this Research Alliance for Regenerative Economics group that I have, that's their job. They try to put together small local farmers in kind of common cause networks so that that you can buy organic seeds and have, so with economies of scale, if you have a bunch of people buying them, or same thing with distribution networks. So you get some of the advantages, but hopefully they're designed in a way that it keeps the ownership locally and individuals, but you have to kind of conform to a particular set of rules so that it isn't that somebody belongs to this and then just goes off and does horrible, nasty, genetically modified things kind of thing. So do you have any of that kind of stuff going on there in Scotland?
I'm not sure. Of course, I cannot say for every single one of them. As far as I know, probably not. I also guess it's also because the scale again of Scotland. It's a small country, and look, even in Edinburgh, we only have half a million people. So everyone kind of knows everyone. It's you can 30 minutes walk from where I live. You can go to almost anywhere in the city. Another problem I find with social enterprise though is the succession, because for example, who is kind of family business style, who would take over once the first generation founder retire,
right?
So that's one thing I find maybe need some
well, and that's sort of true in all of whether it's a socially responsible business or not. And they have different types of, there's a whole bunch of sociology or business research on types of leaders for different types of different size organizations, and also different places in their life cycle. They need different kinds of leadership. So Juaria, what are you doing there? we can't
I'm
even
listening in
see
on your
you.
lovely
You're still there?
conversation. Yes, I am. I'm just fascinated by the whole conversation. I think you find this interesting. If we're applying this to low middle income countries, how does this idea of social entrepreneurship work there, Suwen? Like, how would it work? Because we're thinking of investing in community businesses that serve the community and the locals that they're operating in, whether it's addressing social issues or environmental issues. But if we translate the same model to a low middle income country, how would that work? Would it work through microfinance loans? What's the sort of what's the leverage? What's the tool that you would leverage in order to do the same there?
I think the important thing to transfer the model, because the thing with some local social enterprises is they are very much embedded in the local context. So if you want to transfer the business into another different context, something work here in place A may fail in place B. So the core, I think, is to find out the core impact unit. That's what I call, because we have CPU for computer. So we have CIU for social enterprise, the core impact unit. That's what I say, to find how the impact model actually works. So on the one hand, we have the impact model to know your theory of change. Basically, what's the input, what are the activities, and what's the output, and then outcome and impact, how the entire chain works. And then once you know how that works, then you can apply the philosophy or thing into another context. You may have to change the clothes of that person, but the core would be the same. Yeah. So to find the impact model and also the business model.
So can you give me an example of what's an impact model?
So for example, if we take a local bakery as an example, so maybe the input would be the bakery, the bread, and also the cakes you have made, and then you would bake those. And the output can be you can teach people how to bake the cakes online, and you can sell the whole grain, the healthy things to people so they can improve their health. So the educational content teach them how to do bakeries can be educational and improve their mental health. That model may work in Scotland, but that may not work in some other places. For example, if there is a bad internet connection, you may not be able to deliver that course online. You may have to change into in-person. Or if you are delivering to other people, so basically the delivery model would change, the logistics would change depending on the local context.
So operating within the context and finding solutions relevant to the context are important for there to be success.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my terms, it's all the energy that's available in the context really determines the kinds of models that are going to work, or the kind of, which.
So
Go ahead.
So when we're thinking of the problem, we're thinking of co-creating solutions with agents working in the regions that we find, right? So, for instance, if we're thinking of healthcare, one of the bigger issues we face is the spread of non-communicable diseases. But say you have industries imported from the first world, fast food chain industries who are sort of propelling this, this bad eating habit within low middle income countries, and the only food that local community dwellers can afford is buying from these fast food chain networks. How do we think of building, how do we address non-communicable diseases when we're dealing with industries like these multinational corporations working in low middle income countries who are obviously sort of profiting from the structural inequality that's existing there? How would we be able to then support local businesses to offset that balance, build healthy communities, healthy networks, as Dr. Gorner's talking about? Our businesses, if we sponsor the social entrepreneurs within those communities, can it be effective in doing that to offset that imbalance, that power imbalance, if that makes sense? Hello?
Suwen, did you hear her?
Yeah. Oh, yes, I think my screen froze.
I see.
Yeah. So Juaria, you were mentioning how to tackle the
Yeah, so just thinking of the big tobacco industries or the alcohol industry, how they would sort of foster and unhealthy healthy habits within countries that leads to the rise of non-communicable diseases. How do we support small social entrepreneurs trying to offset the imbalance with those big multinational corporations operating in the same space, if that makes sense?
Mhm. I think, well, first of all, I think that's very difficult. And I think that's
Yeah.
a system issue. So if we think about social entrepreneurs doing a bottom-up approach to try to do some grassroots innovation and have some local impact, we would also need top-down approach. For example, policy support from the government, especially there are some emerging countries where maybe the legal system is not very healthy. We would even need more from the top down to, or even provide subsidies and give tax break. So we would need those systematic change to support and help those social entrepreneurs to make the change they want. Yeah. Otherwise, as you say, those big multinational companies are very powerful.
So one of the things that I've been wondering is whether the impact investing kinds of ideas could in fact shape or shift a little bit anyway of the big multinationals and their approach. Is that anything you guys work on in impact investing?
I would think so. For example, if we take fossil and fuel industry as an example, there are more and more big asset managers, pension funds are divesting from fossil and fuels. So they are forced by divesting. It's actually like a vote. They are voting no to what they are doing. Even University of Edinburgh, they have divested from those fossil fuels. So by supporting more renewable energy, more sustainable energy, they are using their money to show that we are really opposing those fossil fuel companies. And I think we have already seen behavior change in those companies as well. For example, BP, Shell, those big companies, they are actually investing in more renewable energy, green energy, small startups as a venture. I think they have several like venture awards to support those companies. Yeah.
So do we think there's any worry about greenwashing? Kind of the big companies will make a show of doing some of the small scale stuff while still trying to figure out how to maintain their profit maximizing practices.
Greenwashing, I think it's on one hand, I've seen some, to be honest. Yeah, I think it's probably inevitable. I wouldn't say it's inevitable, but I say they are existing in our current world, unfortunately. Yeah.
But it's interesting. The last place I worked at the Capital Institute, one of the guys that was there slightly before me, a guy named Tim McDonald, was very focused on using the pension funds who manage a huge amount of money to sort of transform or create these kinds of pressure that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about some of that is just educating pension fund managers. Because right now they think, I'm making lots of money in the stock market. And the fact, yes, it may be unstable, but still, you hear all this, it's going to be better anyway, so you should stay in there. But he was advocating taking companies. He used the example of Skippy peanut butter, which is one of the largest manufacturers of peanut butter. They have like 60% market share in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And pushing back on them to have organic peanuts and not use, have recycling and all sorts of other kinds of green things, but also in their managerial practices to make sure that it's very much like your social enterprises. They were reinvesting in their companies and reinvesting in their employees and reinvesting in rethinking practices so that they're constantly and maintaining a certain level of the managers couldn't earn more than a certain amount, so that you couldn't just have people who were essentially extracting the wealth away from the thing. And it's too bad it didn't really get off the ground because he had a management problem. But I think it makes sort of sense because, especially with the pension funds, mm-hmm. there is so much. Yeah, there's so much potential for creating pressure, having votes, as you would say.
Yeah, I definitely. And also, again, it's back to what you mentioned earlier about education. It's also about education the government, because the regulatories, they can use regulatory power to ask them to disclose what they have invested.
Yeah.
And also as consumers, we can also have a bigger voice now, because of thanks to the social media and everything else. 2 years ago, there is a guy in Australia sued his pension fund manager, saying you are investing in the things that is harmful to our climate.
Yes.
So I think I cannot remember the result. He probably won the case. Because that's 2 years ago. Yeah, I should probably look up. But that's how powerful even an individual can make. So if we have more transparency, we can definitely turn the tide.
But you also need the alternatives. You need to be able to find a place to invest your money that is, that has some kind of decent return, but on the other hand is more socially responsible and environmentally responsible and sustainable in that kind of a sense.
Okay, great. I think we can wrap this up quite nicely.
Okay, having solved the world's problems.
Well, I think we've developed and I think understood the importance of education, good leadership, accountability, driving for contextual solutions, looking to involve multi-stakeholders, and thinking of an iterative approach to problem solving, and thinking of how we can understand the complexity of human systems and bring about a more enlightened sense of a citizen who holds businesses and its government to account. And that's, I think, the best way we can succeed, even on the social entrepreneurial front, and in order to meet the sustainable development goals as well.
Nicely stated.